think we should try a few more. That's good. That's easy. Yeah, I do that and they come in. It's great. Quite a lot of them, actually, yes.
We're going to start showing up.
Okay, I think we should kick off. We've given you a few minutes extra grace. We seem to have lost one or two of you, confident folks who feel you know Turnitin inside out. Well, let's see. Now, the purpose of this afternoon's session is to make sure you know how to use Turnitin. And you are going to be handing in all coursework for marking right through to your dissertations via Turnitin. We have gone away from paper hand-in. This has certain advantages. It saves paper. It means you don't have to be here in person to hand in your essays. You can do it electronically from anywhere in the world. And it means we don't have any disputes whether you handed in on time or not, because we have an automatic record of exactly when you handed your work in. So it has a lot of advantages, but you must be able to find your way around Turnitin, and you can't hand in any work. In the first half of this presentation, Dan is going to take you through the nuts and bolts of Turnitin. Where do you find it? How do you use it? How do you put your essays in? And how do you get out of it a thing called an originality report, which is how Turnitin analyses your essay. And then the second half of the presentation, I will go through a specimen originality report with you. Basically, the way we use it, if we're looking at it when we are marking your work, it's the same way we encourage you to use the originality report in the same way to check a draft of your essay before you hand it in for marking. So I'm going to hand it to Dan, who's going to take you through the nuts and bolts of how to find and how to use Turnitin.
Now, of course, the first thing you do absolutely have to know is where to find it, because you're kind of completely stuffed without it. So, in all of your modules, they've got a very, very similar layout. And if you kind of look at this is a module navigation for HAR 6030. And in there, there's always basically a little section called Assessment. That's where you're going to find all of the assessments that are actually marked. So any summative assessments that have any kind of weighting towards your final grade, they'll be living in there. So if you want to find out exactly where your assessments are going to be, you click on that, and you should see a section which looks a little bit like this. This is in MOL, of course. And in there, you'll see everything laid out in something that looks mostly like this. At the very top, you'll see My Grades. Luke was talking about it earlier on, but basically that's where you click to find out exactly what your marks are, and to go find your feedback and other kind of things along those lines. The important information relating to your assessments is basically the list of all of the regulations, rules, and guidelines for submitting work in the University of Sheffield. And that was really good for kind of just checking before you actually go ahead and submit a finished assignment. Definitely worth reading through at least once. The assessment guidelines document and things like that, you will see kind of different versions of module briefs in different kind of different modules. Some of them will have it written out directly down on paper, some of them will attach a Word document, others will have PDF or other kind of instructions. But there will be a guide on exactly what is expected of you, how to perform the work, and all the rest of it. Some of them also have things like marking scales and rubrics. Most of them will have just kind of a standard SHAR marking scale, which can be found in the SHAR student handbook, but a few have slightly different ones. And the other thing that is very, very important is there will be things like draft slots and final slots. Draft slot, like you're going to experience very, very soon with the student essay that's in the hub, just so that's the kind of the writing skills test essay. This is a slot which doesn't have any kind of it lets you run through the report and lets you kind of get an originality report off of it, but it doesn't get stored forever and ever and ever on record. So with Turnitin, what they do is they have a massive, massive database of all of the submissions that are ever made to Turnitin, as well as all of the databases of journals and publications and everything else ever kind of produced. And it covers a lot of the internet, massive amounts of it. So it can usually match up any bits of text to anything else. Now when you hand into draft, we're saying we don't want this to go into some massive database of everybody's work, because we don't want that piece of work that you submit to the draft to be checked against what you submit in your final slot. So you can submit to the draft, and you can submit here again and again and again and again, solely for the purposes of producing these originality reports, which will let you see roughly how your how much text Turnitin has managed to match up. When it comes to the actual final submission, as you can probably tell, there's usually something that's got something along the lines of final, and that's the place where you can only submit one time, and it has to be the final completed, absolutely perfect assignment. So with this one here, as many times as you want, throw anything you like into here, that's all fine, and it will check through it. But this one here, you have to make sure, just the final one, make sure it's the right version of it, and you only get the one go. If anything does go wrong, like it says on here, do contact the course admin for your course. So, once you submit into draft, you'll see something like this. So as soon as you click on View Complete, you see the Turnitin screen. Ta-da! And on here, you'll see basically some basic information. So usually just the dates are the kind of the thing you really need to know. So the due date, the start date, those two kind of speak for themselves. And the post date. That date is the date, usually 3 weeks later, when you get your feedback. Until that point, you basically only see originality reports, but no actual feedback on your work or anything like that. And the other buttons over at the far side, submit, should be a nice big blue button if it's the only time you've ever submitted to this, and the rest will be greyed out. Once you've submitted once, you'll be able to go to the view and actually see your originality report. You'll also have a little score in this little empty patch here, which tells you just quickly, as a little number, exactly what you scored on your similarity report. Now that number isn't particularly important, and that's something that Alan's going to get to very, very soon. But once you kind of see a similarity kind of number in there, you know it's actually done a check over, and there's actually something for you to view in that originality report. So when it comes to uploading a submission, so when you click submit, you see something just like this. It'll automatically fill in your name, but the thing that you have to remember to do is, in the submission title, put your registration number in. As we explained earlier on this morning, this is because we mark everything anonymously, so if we just have your number in there, we've got at least something that we can match up your paper to, should we ever actually need to have the admins kind of sort a problem out. But at the same time, none of the modern tutors or markers actually know your student registration number. To them, it's just an anonymous number. So that means it's unidentifiable to the tutors and markers, but the admins can sort problems out if they arise. The other point about this, when it comes to keeping things anonymous, is if you want it to be anonymous, don't do anything like put your name on the paper or make the file name of your paper something like Joe Bloggs' submission, because that way we can figure out exactly who you are as well. Just little things like that should be kept in mind. So when you go down to the very bottom of this little bit, you can only just see it here, but there's a kind of little bit here where you can actually pick out the file you need to upload. So you just click on Choose File, and it'll start uploading whichever kind of paper you've decided to upload. Now in this case, I went and picked Moby Dick, which of course is very, very plagiarised. I think, you know, it's going to come back with a pretty high score on the originality report. But, you know, I gave it a go anyway. So when you submit it, you see a page that's very similar to this, where it just kind of gives you a quick overview of what you submitted, just to make sure that you actually have submitted what you intended to submit. So do give it a quick look, just to make sure that that isn't something that you really didn't expect to see. It does strip out all the formatting. It actually looks a little bit different to this now, but you do just see kind of a little overview of your submitted paper. And then when you click OK to that, that's it. It finalises the submission, and off it goes. And as you see at the top, it says you get a digital receipt. Now, this kind of page here isn't the digital receipt. The actual digital receipt gets sent directly to your email address and looks just like this. Now, whenever you get a Turnitin digital receipt, do make sure you save it away somewhere. Keep it safe on record and stored away, just in case we have any problems with any submission. So this means if you can say send us a copy of this receipt later on, then if you have a problem, we'll be able to kind of look at the details there, find the submission and pull it out, and, you know, sort any problems out. So do make sure you keep hold of these. Just tuck them away somewhere in your inbox. Now, once you've submitted, as I mentioned before, you get the little similarity score just over here. And as predicted, my chapter from Moby Dick scored 100% figures. So to actually have a look at it, I can either click on the similarity score right there or the view button over in the corner. And then I'll see something that looks just like this. And as you can see, the bit in red is everything that's decided is pinched. So it's been, it's done a pretty good job. It's found quite a lot of pinched stuff. So I managed to escape the word "and," but other than that, it's pretty much a bang-on match. So, and down the right-hand side, you can see all the sources it's actually matched it from. So I could click on any of these little sources down here on the right-hand side and see exactly what it's matched it to on the internet. So if I go and click on this Gods of Ramen source here, it actually I can kind of go to this, click on the website, and actually see the whole kind of thing is pinched. Or I can, just kind of get a quick preview right here. And that makes it very, very easy for any markers to see if anything has been stolen, or just kind of plagiarised wholesale. It also works for kind of little small things like just changing the odd word and stuff like that. It is actually very, very clever when it comes to doing text matching. So, when you do this, and there's a little demonstration of exactly what it looks like when you kind of look at it in full view. So you can see the whole wodge of text and exactly which bits have been just missed out, swapped or changed around and stuff like that. So as you can imagine, this is quite useful when you actually want to check if anything you put onto a paper exists somewhere else on the internet. Now, of course, there could be good reasons why you might actually have a match. There could be slightly naughtier reasons why you could have a match, and that is exactly what Alan is going to talk us through now.
Right, okay. Just going to go back one slide on that.
Of course,
that's okay. Okay, that sounds horribly complex and technical because these things are easier to do than to explain. And this is where I think you'll find the writing test essay a good piece of work because it will give you a chance to use Turnitin in a safe environment. It's not like I've got to hand this in or whether I'm going to fail the module. It gives you a chance to test your hands at Turnitin. Like most things, it's much easier to do than to explain. So when you go into the Mole Classroom for the module or you go into the Mole Classroom for the test essay, things will be a lot easier. As Dan has explained, when you want to hand in any piece of work, including the test essay and the essays for the modules you're sitting, you go to the Mole Classroom, you go to Assessments, and you will see two types of Turnitin slot. One is called Draft, and one is usually called Final. Those are fairly self-explanatory. The draft one, as Dan explained, is for you to use to test your essay. It enables you to put your essay through Turnitin, and then to see this thing called the originality report, something like this, look through it and decide if your essay is okay or does it need a bit of work doing. And I'll show you how to use an originality report in just a few minutes. The important thing from time management is that you have to allow time to do this. We won't give you extra time just because you're sitting around twiddling your thumbs waiting for a Turnitin originality report to turn up. And realistically, I suggest you allow time, so you have a draft of your essay, fairly complete. You can put it into one of those draft slots. You can look at the originality report, and you have a day or two spare so you can do some editing if you need to. If your essay has caused problems when you look at the originality report, you've got a day or two for some final editing before you hand it in, but you have to build that time into your planning. Sorry. If you're using Turnitin in the UK, the originality report comes back probably in a matter of minutes. Realistically, all you've got to do is put your essay into Turnitin, go for a walk around the block or something, come back, and you'll probably be able to access the originality report. If you're accessing Turnitin from outside the UK, there can sometimes be a bit of a delay, potentially up to about 24 hours if you're working on Turnitin from outside the UK. But inside the UK, it's not quite instantaneous, it's very quick. But you do need to allow time to put your essay through the draft slot. You've got time to look at the originality report, and you've got a little bit of time to do some final editing. When you are happy that you have the final version, this is it, then you go to the other slot, the one that says final, you put your essay into that, and you don't see it again. It then goes off to be marked. So it goes away from you and it goes off to the markers so they can mark it. Now, for those of you who have multiple drafts of an essay, I suggest that you find some way of numbering your drafts logically so that when you put that essay into the final slot, it really is the one you want to go off to be marked. It's not some intermediate draft or something. Occasionally we get students turning up at the reception saying, I put the wrong one in. Can I get it out? I've got a bigger, better essay here. Can I put this one in instead? The answer, for all practical purposes, is no, you can't. There are ways of getting things out of Turnitin. It involves Dan and Luke and his mates going down into the car park and performing strange demonic rites with pentangles. But it's not a good use of their time. Once you put something into Turnitin, it stays there. And basically, once you put it into that final slot, it goes off and it stays in Turnitin, as far as I can make out, for as long as Turnitin exists. And we can't get it out for all practical purposes. So make sure you hand the right one in. Now, when you get your originality report out, two things will strike you. First of all, there's a number up in the top corner. That number is not your mark. That comes later. That number is the proportion or the percentage of your essay which Turnitin thinks comes from other places. What are those other places? Well, it's browsing the internet, it's browsing electronic books and journals, so it's looking for material you may have copied from electronic sources. And this is where it gets clever. It's comparing your work with other students' work which has been handed in for marking. So it may turn up collusion if you've nicked someone else's work. And this is the really cool bit. It is comparing your work with work you have handed in on other modules. So it may show up self-plagiarism if you are copying material from one module into the essay for another module. It may show all that up. So the first thing is that percentage. Now, out of curiosity, what do you think is an acceptable text matching score to have? How big can that number be? 10%? Anyone? 5? Sorry? Sorry? I think you'd find it very hard to get 0. Now, there isn't actually a right number. We used to set students a target to aim for, which is a bit higher than any of the ones you've suggested, actually. And that was completely counterproductive because we found what the students were doing. They had a perfectly good essay. There was nothing wrong with it. But because the number wasn't right, they spent ages and ages twiddling with the essay, trying to get the mark down a few percent. And their essay was fine. And what they should really have done is spend that time on doing more reading and research to write a better essay and get more marks. So we do not set a target. Obviously, everyone looks at the number. People get excited about numbers. I would suggest, though, that maybe a number above 30% does attract attention. But basically what you need to do is look at the number and think, well, a bit high, a bit low. What we really want you to do is to look through the whole text of the essay. This is what we do as markers. This is what we advise you to do, is to look through the text of the essay and see where there is matched text, where Turnitin thinks this stuff has come from somewhere else. And some of those blocks of matched text are harmless, and you can leave them alone. Some of them are quite dangerous, and you need to do something about them. Now, don't shout out if you know the answers. I'll come back to this a bit later on. It is possible that you could submit your essay to Turnitin. Your text matching score could be 0%, and it could still be 100% plagiarised. If you know the answer, don't shout out. We'll come back to that later. On the other hand, you could put your essay through Turnitin. You could come back with a text matching score, not quite 100%, but let's say 95%, but it's not plagiarised. We'll come back to that later. It's not looking a bit puzzled. But what I want to do now is to actually show you an example of an originality report. This is more or less how Turnitin analyses your essay. It gives you the number in the top, we talked about that, and then it goes through your essay and it picks out certain bits of text in colour. Nice bright colours. Does this mean Turnitin is a vast army of mice armed with marker pens? No. These are the bits that Turnitin says, I think this material in colour comes from somewhere else. Now, a few other points from Dan's point of view. The specimen essay comes from that dreadful old plagiarist, Mr. O'Rourke, so the alarm bells are automatically ringing. But he's put his name on it. As Dan has pointed out, we don't want you to identify your essays with your name. We've gone over to anonymous marking. The idea here is that we are not going to look at some students more or less favourably because they've made a good or bad impression on the tutor in the module. The idea is you're just a number. We don't know who you are. It's anonymous marking. We're very keen on preserving that. So when you hand your essays in, please identify yourself by your registration number. Now, some of you, I think, may have two numbers. You have a U-card number and a registration number. Please make sure you use the right one, your registration number, which is unique to you. Do not identify yourself by your name or your cat's birthday or your girlfriend's mother's phone number or something like that. Identify yourself by your registration number. If you don't do that, if you put in the wrong number or something, that means that either the marker or the module administrative team have to find out who you are. I'll let you into a little trade secret. When we're marking, we've got piles of stuff to mark. We've got to do it in 3 weeks or the university beats us up. So when you're marking, time is a bit tight. Anything which slows down marking, like students not putting the right number on their essay, puts markers in a bad mood. And a bad mooded marker is bad for your marks. So keep your markers happy, identify yourself only by your number. So, here's our originality report, and we go down and look at it. Well, the first 2 paragraphs look fine. Nothing's been highlighted there. So it seems maybe Mr. O'Rourke has finally learned his lesson and learned how to write. I'm not saying at this point whether this is good writing, whether this is going to get a good mark or not. I'm just saying, are there any issues about unfair means? So things look all right to start with until we get down to here. And we have a little block of text highlighted in purple. The little number next to it tells us a source for that. We could click on that, as Dan has shown you, and could find the source. So that first one, number 9. Does anyone see a problem with that? Can we ignore that, or is it dangerous?
It's the name of organizations.
Yeah. The World Health Organization and the United Nations Children's Fund, brackets UNICEF. That's the name of a proper organisation, and you can't really express that any other way. You can't say anything else other than the World Health Organization and United Nations Children's Fund. It's the proper name. So proper names of organisations or books or reports or journals, no problem. Well, you can actually say it another way. You can use an abbreviation. You can use UNICEF. And that's the important point there is that if you're writing your essay, the first time you use any acronym or abbreviation, you should always write it out in full. Then give the shortened version, and you can use the shortened version from then on. So, World Health Organization and United Nations Children's Fund, brackets, UNICEF. And then you can use UNICEF for the rest of the essay as much as you like, so you know what it stands for. So that's not a problem. It's quite long, but it is the proper name of a book or an organisation or something, so that's not going to cause any problems. Now let me go down a bit further, and we come to this rather more substantial chunk of text. Source 3. Is that a problem? Is 3 going to get you into trouble at all?
If you cite it correctly, it shouldn't.
No, it's a direct quote, and I've shown it's a direct quote. We use quotation marks, or I can indent it or put in italics, but that's from It's Bizarre That the World down to The Reality Often Believes This. That block of text is very clearly indicated as a quotation. And as with all quotations, we know where it's come from. It was written by someone called Richards. I think it's from an editorial in the British Medical Journal about 9 years ago, and we have a page number, so we know exactly where that's come from. So that's a direct quote, properly cited. That citation should occur in your references. That's not a problem. It's a direct quote. We don't need to worry about that. Now, let's go down a bit further. What about this bit in red? Source 1. Is this a problem? Yes. Now it's got a reference, it's got a citation that says connecting or health. That was a bit pessimistic. I think it should be connecting for health. The NHS wasn't given a choice. You can either connect or have health. You're supposed to have both. So there is a source at the end, but as Turnitin has shown, all that text comes straight out of this document, Connecting for Health. But it's not indicated as a quote. No quotation marks, no indentation, no italics. So that needs a bit of work doing on it. And just bunging your source at the end of a block of text which you have copied from somewhere else, that doesn't get you off the plagiarism hook. That is plagiarism. Just sticking a citation or a reference at the end of a block of text is not good enough. You've got 2 options with that block of text. Far and away the better one would be to rewrite it in your own words to show that you understand the points it is making and cite and reference it. Alternatively, you could put quotation marks around it. Again, that would get you off the plagiarism hook, but it wouldn't be a good piece of writing. It would just be a big chunk of somebody else's words. So indicating it clearly as a quotation, you don't get into trouble, but you probably won't get very many marks. Okay, let's go down a bit further. We've got a bit of blue text coming up. Source 8.
It's quoted, but there's no reference right after the sentence.
It looks like a little direct quote.
Yeah.
Quote, recorded cases at our first contact with professional staff and shared securely between those providing our care. And then there's this 3 floating around. Now, where's that 3 come from?
Reference number 3.
Sorry?
Reference number 3.
Yeah, I think if you look at the referencing, most of this essay uses, oh, I'm going to get this confused, Harvard and Vancouver. Most of them uses Harvard, name, author and date, okay? So most of it uses Harvard. And what this 3 is, it's actually a Vancouver referencing style. Because that bit of text has been copied from somewhere, and whoever copied it, well, Mr. O'Rourke, he copied the 3. He included in his cut and paste the Harvard referencing from the BMJ. That looks a bit funny. That would kind of, something funny going on here. But the point is, referencing, cite and reference your essays consistently. Do not use a mixture of Harvard and Vancouver in the same essay. It looks weird and it gets you into trouble. So there's a bit, something funny going on there anyway. Now let's go down a bit further. What have we got here? What about this chunk, number 2? Is this going to get you into trouble? It's a big chunk of text. It's come practically, well, word for word from a source somewhere. We could click on that too and we could find out the source. We've no idea where it's come from. No citation, no reference. That is very frank plagiarism. And for that sort of thing, we would ask you to come and see us. Okay? So you need to do something about blocks of text like that. What you should be looking for in the originality report is a block of text. And when I say a block, I mean several consecutive sentences or a complete paragraph like that, which seem to come from one source, where few, if any, of the words have been rewritten. So that's the sort of thing that you need to be on the lookout for. That's the thing we should think, right, do something about it. Ideally, rewrite in my own words, cite and reference. If I'm really stuck, okay, make it into a quotation. Now, I want to ask about reference lists. Then we go down to the reference list. And typically, for a reference list, you see something like this. All the references in 1s or 2s or 3s will match somewhere else. Because if you think about it, there is a very large but a finite source of material out there. There's a finite but very large number of books, journals and websites. And lots of people are using them to write stuff. So sooner or later, your reference list will match with someone else's reference list or a bibliography or a reading list somewhere. We're not too worried about that. So the reference list, and if you have a very big reference list, you'll find, if you have a huge reference list, your text matching score can be very high, but don't worry, because it's just matching your references in 1s and 2s and 3s. But one thing that does look a little bit odd, just before we leave this one, what about around the bottom here? This is a bit funny. A great big chunk of references which all come from the same source. And embedded in the middle of them is what looks like a student number. Because I think these references have been copied from somebody else's paper. So that would look a little bit odd. But a large reference list where the references are matching in 1s, 2s and 3s, you're not going to worry about that. Now, my 2 little questions earlier. How can you submit an essay which has a text matching score of 0 but is 100% plagiarised? Turnitin is matching your work against electronic books, electronic journals, websites, non-electronic. Maybe you've done it the old-fashioned hard way. You've sat down with a big old-fashioned book which is not available electronically at all, or a journal which is not available electronically, and you have written it out laboriously, hand by hand, line by line. So the Turnitin score may be 0, but that's still plagiarised if you have copied it from an electronic source. There is a little concept in English called Sod's Law. Anyone come across it? Sod's Law? Otherwise known as the universal law of cussedness. It basically says if something can go wrong, it will go wrong at the worst possible moment in the worst possible time. And chances are that if you have copied your essay from an old-fashioned paper-based book, who knows, your marker may have written it 30 years ago and will recognise it and get you. So it's not quite foolproof, but it's pretty foolproof. The other option, I said, a very high text matching score. Supposing you had a score of 95%, if your essay just consisted of quote after quote after quote, properly laid out as a quote, cited, referenced everything, we're not going to get you for unfair means because you're clearly showing those are quotes, but there's very little of your own work, so you tend not to get many marks for that. Okay? So that's how to use Turnitin reports, and we in SHA are very liberal. We not only allow, we encourage you to use the originality reports just the same way as we, your markers, use them when you hand in the work. So look at the number and think, a bit high, or okay. But what really matters is to look through your paper, see where these blocks of matched text are. Some are fine, leave them alone, but some of them you may think, I need to do something about this. Okay? Now, let's go back to Dan's presentation. Okay, I think this is basically a summary of what I've said. So using the original report, look at the text matching score. You can't avoid numbers. Look through the report and look for matched text. If those matches are things like your reference list, proper names or direct quotes, leave them alone. If they are blocks of matched text, several sentences or a whole paragraph which seems to come from one source, do something about it before you hand in the final one for marking. Okay, any questions?